started. So welcome to anyone who's joining us after the live workshop and listening in on the webinar recording. So I'd like to bring everyone's attention to the CMSRF Code of Conduct. We've pasted a link to that in the chat, most of which from that Code of Conduct goes without saying. Please be respectful to other participants. This forum is very much about bringing people together and sharing diverse perspectives. We're striving here for open, transparent, and inclusive dialogue. So just be mindful of that and be open to the discussions that are happening with your fellow workshop participants. So I'm going to start by introducing the workshop objectives and the speakers. We wanted to start today by providing a quick introduction to the Canadian Marine Shipping Risk Forum and our objectives for the workshop. So the Canadian Marine Shipping Risk Forum, the CMSRF, it's a community of practice which is open to people and organizations working in or conducting research on shipping risk. It provides those interested with a platform to network and share knowledge around shipping risk. So the CMSRF was launched in the fall of 2019 by MEOPAR in collaboration with Clear Seas and Exampl. So we've had about 5 different sessions to date. These collaborative sessions bringing different risk practitioners together. This included a kickoff webinar in October of 2019 and an in-person workshop in December of 2019. So the workshop today is our next event to help foster discussions on marine shipping risk. Our next set of workshops and webinars are aimed at identifying gaps in shipping risk knowledge and risk communication by looking at Canadian risk initiatives, information, and resources related to shipping risk, outlining a common risk framework on marine shipping, and mapping initiatives and resources to a risk framework. So the focus and objectives for today's workshop is to help pull together an inventory of shipping risk resources, including different models, tools, approaches, practices, and processes, and other resources that could be considered and included in a common risk framework. So to kick us off today, we have a series of short presentations by 4 different speakers. So first, Paul Blomerus, who's the Executive Director of Clear Seas, will provide more context on the objectives of the Canadian Marine Shipping Risk Forum and its origins, and provide some examples of marine shipping risk projects that are underway at Clear Seas. So then Michael Wallace, who's at Transport Canada, will outline the need for pulling together the fragmented pieces of shipping risk initiatives, resources, and research that's happening in Canada. Following that, Pelot at MEOPAR is going to provide a short overview of different shipping risk research studies undertaken by MEOPAR researchers. And finally, Floris Goerlandt at Dalhousie University is going to outline elements that are common to many different risk frameworks that are relevant to shipping and shipping risk, presenting a few different examples and discussing how they differ. This will help set the stage for our breakout group discussions. So as mentioned, we're going to have that question and answer period following the presentations. If you have questions during the presentations, please include them in the chat. You can direct them to the specific speaker by including the speaker's name with your question, but we'll also have an opportunity to raise hands and provide more questions during the Q&A period itself. So following the presentations, as mentioned, we're going to go into breakout group discussions about building that inventory of shipping risk resources and initiatives. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Paul at Clear Seas. So take it away, Paul.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the workshop. Thanks for coming. I'm going to share my presentation with you. As Jen said, I'm the Executive Director of Clear Seas. And what I wanted to present to you today was some thoughts on our experience in marine shipping risk analysis and some of the projects that we're working on, but also to provide some context for the need for the workshop. Like Jennifer, I'm speaking to you today from Vancouver, British Columbia. That's where Clear Seas is headquartered, the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And I'm quite excited to share with you today some of the insights we've gained at Clear Seas. So first, a few words on Clear Seas. We are an independent not-for-profit organization. We've been around since 2015, and we're funded by a combination of government funding and industry funding. But our purpose is really to facilitate a better understanding of the risks, benefits, and best practices for both safe and sustainable marine shipping in Canada. So our audience is the general public. it's government, it's industry. For the general public, we provide a function of informing them about the marine industry and both the risks and also the activities of the industry in mitigating those risks. But we also listen to the general public. So we provide a kind of a two-way communication tool in the sense that we conduct regular surveys of the general public to understand what their concerns are, and then we inform on what's going on in those topics. For government, we play both an informational role, so we provide resources to introduce government officials and staff to topics, and our aspiration is that by sharing best practices, we can encourage best practice in terms of policy development. Similarly, for industry, our role is in informing on best practices and in stimulating adoptions and improvements in practices. You can see on the right there a map of our user base. So people, over 200,000 Canadians use our material. We're approaching about 1% of the population in some provinces. You can see a focus of interest from provinces that have a maritime connection, but actually across Canada, we have interest in these topics. So I wanted to give you share you some of the perspectives we've gained as we've worked in the area of marine shipping risk. So focusing on the safe side rather than the sustainable side of our mandate. We have an initiative called Marine Transportation Corridors, which is initially focused on the Pacific coast. And so we fairly early on in Clear Seas' life, we did a lot of work on some scenario-based analyses of risk. So what I want to say, what might happen. So vessel drift and response, we published a report understanding how quickly, what might happen to a vessel if it got into trouble off the coast, how tugs of opportunity, how tugs might respond to rescue that vessel, and indeed some emergency towing vessel needs assessment. You can see an animation there of the results of that survey that says, if you positioned emergency towing vessels on Canada's Pacific coast, how would that reduce the zone of no saves for the vessel that got into trouble? So these are kind of scenario-based analyses and probability-based analyses of risk. And that was some of the first work that we did in maritime risk. And it had some good results too. I think the voluntary shipping protection zone, as a safe distance offshore, has been put in place in September of Haida Gwaii. Our work contributed to helping position that work. And also the emergency towing vessels in 2018, Canadian Coast Guard leased 2 emergency towing vessels, and in fact one was called into action earlier this year to help assist a bulk carrier off of Victoria. So some results, if you like, in terms of risk mitigation activities as a result of some of that analytical work. Then more recently, we've done some work more in the category of the potential impacts of what would happen if those mitigation efforts were not successful. If a vessel did go aground or a spill did occur, we just published earlier this year a report on assessing the sensitivity of coastal areas to oil spills, and included in that was an interactive map, so providing that analysis of the sensitivity of different coastal areas due to various factors. And we're going to continue to do some work to make that data available to others working in the marine spatial planning world through the EMSA platform that we'll presumably hear some more about later on. So that's in the category of kind of impact assessment and understanding what would happen. We're currently working on, and we'll publish early next year, the final component of this marine transportation corridors, which is a detailed vessel traffic analysis. So this is more about where do ships go, and I think this is an essential component of risk analysis, is to understand what, as a key driver of probability, what could happen. So this is a detailed assessment of different ship types, where they travel, and interestingly, more importantly, the behaviors, what is driving them to do different things, because I think that's an important component of risk assessment. And that report will come out in January, or at least early next year. So that gives you some perspective of some of the work we're doing. I also wanted to draw your attention to two other projects we're working on. We are building a commercial marine database of incidents and accidents using Transportation Safety Board and US Coast Guard information to present in an interactive dashboard the history of what's really happened. Because I think an important component of risk assessment is also obviously looking backwards and saying what did happen, because to help plan mitigation activities or help plan. So the intention is to be able to provide that information to inform that discussion. And this program is across the whole of Canada. And then the final project I would draw your attention to is a project that we jointly fund with MEOPAR at the University of Ottawa with Professor Jackie Dawson, looking at low impact Arctic shipping corridors. And this is although it's in a relatively small area in Nunavut, it's a pilot of this integrated marine spatial planning approach that tries to integrate all of that, some of the analyses that we talked about in terms of vessel traffic, in terms of integrating traditional knowledge and indigenous voices into that planning process, integrating concepts of marine mammal impacts and ecosystem impacts, and then making recommendations as to how transportation corridors should be adapted to minimize risk. And so there's some very interesting insights coming out of that work, which is in the category of that forward-looking, that says, how do you then recommend mitigation actions to minimize risk? So, as we've been engaged in this, the need for some kind of forum like the Marine Shipping Risk Forum that we're all here today became immediately clear to us, because the opportunity to share practices, as Jen outlined, the objectives of the Marine Shipping Risk Forum are to provide that forum for exchange. And it has been very helpful to us and others in the environment of risk analysis to have this forum. I think what's changed and what's driving partly the need for this particular workshop and a more structured, perhaps, approach to categorizing and inventorying our activities is the increase in activity. So partly due to the Oceans Protection Plan, but just in general, and partly due to the number of impact assessments that are ongoing for different projects, the level of activity in this sphere in and around Canadian waters has meant that just that sort of volume of activity means that I think the opportunities for potentially for duplication or potential opportunities for confusion from the customers of our community is intensified. And so we receive feedback directly from industry that this is indeed true, that there are often multiple activities, be they within government, different government departments, or within industry, or within the non-for-profit or the research and academic sector, potentially focused on the same things with different approaches. And so, we thought that a more focused approach through this workshop and its follow-ons would be very valuable, both to, at a minimum, to provide an inventory to say who's doing what, and do that in a way that would allow us to communicate with each other to at least minimum avoid duplication and understand potential differences of approach. But an even better if we can ultimately come up with a coordinated and a unified risk framework. We'll hear more about those topics later on, but I think that would be fantastic if we could have a shared approach to the assessment and management of risk, or at least to approach a unified approach. That would be a fantastic outcome from this process. I'll leave you with, I talked about the industry focus on this, and I think we'll hear from Michael around the government focus on this topic. I'll leave you with a thought from the general public. This is a general from our 2020 public opinion poll. We run a public opinion poll every 2 years with the in partnership with the Angus Reid Institute. And one of the results that really stuck out for me is we asked people, does marine safety receive the appropriate amount of attention, both in the safety policies and procedures that are in place, and the oversight and enforcement of those maritime shipping safety policies. So clearly those are all the elements of risk assessment and risk management and risk. And you can see quite starkly there that half of the population of the survey respondents said that no, not enough was being done in terms of putting safety policies and procedures in place. And 48% said that no, not enough was being done, not enough attention was being paid to the oversight and enforcement of marine shipping safety and policies that are in place. So I think a stark reminder from the general public out there saying, this forum clearly is important, and the work that's being done and the work that we're contemplating is needed. I will leave it there and hand it back. I guess I'm going to hand it over to Michael.
Thanks very much, Paul. I appreciate you kicking it off for me. And yes, I am going to go into some of the actions that the Government of Canada has been taking specific to the Oceans Protection Plan. So I think it's important to note right off the bat before I start on my presentation that I will be providing sort of a broad inventory of some of the activities that the Government of Canada is taking in this space around sort of the assessment, the identification, and the mitigation of marine shipping risks. So I myself am not the subject matter expert on all of these initiatives. Many of these initiatives are being led by my colleagues in different parts of the country. So if you do have specific questions, I may need to point you in the right direction before to get sort of the appropriate answer. With that said, for my presentation, as I mentioned, my name is Michael Wallace. I work for Transport Canada out of the Ottawa office, and I work on the Oceans Protection Plan. To start, I'd like to emphasize what Paul was saying around the importance of the work that's being started here today. And I'd like to thank the organizers of the event for their kind invitation to speak and for putting on this event. Building a strong community of practice, identifying existing tools and best practices is a critical step in making sure that Canada has strong and consistent risk management in the area of marine shipping. And why this is particularly important for me, someone who works in this space, is because there's a lot of work being done in the space. I think Paul hinted at just the number of initiatives that the government, industry, and other organizations are launching. So from the government perspective and what I'm talking about today, I'll be providing sort of a brief summary of some of those works. They will range from initiatives designed to put in place essentially frameworks to manage risk, such as the cumulative effects of marine shipping initiative and proactive vessel management, all the way through to some of the other pieces where we're simply developing sort of tools and best practices. I should mention that through the OPP and through all of these initiatives, the Government of Canada is taking the approach of collaborating with Indigenous groups, industry, other levels of government, and marine stakeholders on how we can move forward. And we certainly are looking for opportunities to further refine and develop our approaches as the work progresses. So the first initiative that I'll speak to is proactive vessel management. So this is an initiative that brings together Indigenous communities, industry, vessel operators, and is primarily designed to find voluntary solutions to concerns on the waterway. One particular thing that I want to highlight around this initiative is that there is a draft national framework that's been circulated for commentary and feedback. And this national framework essentially outlines how sort of the proactive vessel management approach could be taken in Canada on a national scale and sort of the steps in that process. So for people who are interested, I am happy to provide a link to that framework, and we certainly are looking for people to provide their feedback and their comments. helping inform that framework are 5 pilot projects that were launched under the Oceans Protection Plan. One of the projects was actually mentioned by Paul in his presentation around sort of the voluntary protection zone for shipping around Haida Gwaii. And there's also work being done in the Arctic and other parts of BC. Here's just a map to show sort of where those 5 pilot projects are located. Oh, sorry. And then sort of another initiative is the cumulative effects of marine shipping. So once again, this is an initiative not necessarily to look at voluntary solutions, but to come up with a cumulative effects framework to take a look at sort of the cumulative effects of marine shipping in a given area. This initiative is very focused on sort of the identification, the assessment of these cumulative effects, and then setting the stage for mitigation measures to be developed to mitigate these cumulative effects down the road. Once again, with this initiative, just like proactive vessel management, there is a national framework that is being developed and that we are engaging on. So for those of you who are interested in taking a look at what that framework document looks like and taking a look at the framework that has been established, I can provide a link to the discussion paper that essentially outlines sort of more of the specifics around this particular initiative. These are just some examples of some of the work that's being done under this particular initiative. Once again, similar to, I think, what Paul was talking about, we are looking at a number of different factors when we're assessing cumulative effects. We're looking at sort of those valued components and those things that are being stressed, perhaps by marine shipping. And we're also looking at sort of where these things are occurring. Once again, coming back to, again, what Paul was talking about, a lot of these initiatives between Clear Seas and the Government of Canada are linked. There's another initiative called the Emergency Towing Initiative. In this initiative, the Government of Canada has been tasked with coming up with a long-term strategy for emergency towing. And what we're trying to do now is we're trying to make sure that that strategy is informed by a marine navigation risk assessment. So we have an evidence basis to support whatever decisions we're putting forward to Cabinet. This risk assessment is going to use some analyses, and it's going to use some unique tools that are being developed by Transport Canada for this particular purpose. I'll be doing a little bit of a video at the end of this presentation to talk more in depth about those tools and what they look like. But just for people's awareness, there will be 4 sort of regional assessments conducted, one in the West Coast, one for the East Coast, and then another for sort of Central and the Arctic regions. And these risk assessments are scheduled to be completed by fall of 2023. Moving along, there is the ongoing term pole initiative. So term pole is essentially a voluntary project-specific navigation risk assessment that proponents can opt into or that can be requested. Right now, these term poles are done. So a term pole was done for example, the Trans Mountain project out west. There was also one done for Energy East when that was a proposal in the Bay of Fundy. And what the Government of Canada is working at right now is sort of taking a look at options on how we modernize the term pole process. Some of this is being driven by the new Impact Assessment Act. So there is a discussion paper that is being developed that I assume will be shared for consultation in the future. And in support of this, Transport Canada is also looking at how we can update and enhance some of our marine risk capability to be able to play an active role in these term poles and in sort of future environmental assessments. Another key initiative for the government under the Oceans Protection Plan is sort of the Enhanced Maritime Situational Awareness Initiative. This is an initiative where the government is looking to make sort of a web-based geographic information system available to a range of stakeholders, starting with some pilot communities, to make sure that we can improve sort of the quality and access to information on marine activity for people that are interested and people that are in coastal communities. Right now, there's a partnership between TC and 13 Indigenous communities for this pilot project. And we are looking for these communities to help Transport sort of guide the development of this system and to help inform what the system could look like in the future. This collaborative work has continued, and we are looking to expand the use of EMSA, both in terms of the information that's on the platform, as well as the users who would be using this platform in the future. Moving forward, a couple of things that I'd like to highlight Obviously, there's a lot of work that's happening in this space. I've just gone through a couple of initiatives that are very Transport Canada focused, but there's other work being done in other government departments around this very same topic. So the government is in the process of putting together a lot of tools, a lot of processes that can help the assessment and mitigation of marine risks. I'll be playing the video shortly to provide an example of these tools. Moving forward, our big focus over the coming year is to build consistency in how risk is assessed, as well as alignment between these different frameworks that are being put in place. Because one of the big concerns that we have heard is around consistency and making sure that when the Government of Canada assesses an issue in one place, it's doing it in a way that's similar to how it's assessed in other regions of the country. So we can provide certainty both to coastal communities and how their issues will be addressed, but also to the marine shipping industry in terms of how the Government of Canada is approaching these key questions that we get. So at this point, I'll end my presentation and I will look to share the video as long as the technology cooperates. So if you will bear with me for one moment, I will set that up. I apologize. Cindy, if it's not too much trouble, I don't know if you have the video handy on your end.
I could get it set up. Let me just give me a couple minutes, or hopefully not that long. I'll see if I can get it going.
Let me see if I can find it here. Oh, thank you. I do have it.
At Transport Canada, within the Oceans Protections Plan, we have been and continue to develop specific GIS tools that help us to sort, compile, and analyze large amounts of data that feed into decision-making processes. We have built and continue to build a suite of tools that are based around historical AIS data specifically for projects and initiatives involving management, planning, and resource allocation, such as the Emergency Towing Initiative. To create a solid base historical AIS dataset, we have fused the last 5 years, from 2015 to 2019, of terrestrial AIS and satellite AIS in and around Canada. This is joined with static vessel data that helps us to classify vessels by types and sizes. The first tool we are showing is called our Vessel Movement Density and Statistics tool. Products and analyses that are computed from this tool are used in multiple projects within OPP and TC at large. The tool creates independent vessel movements per vessel from positional AIS messages through time, like connecting the dots. This process is repeated from all vessels as recorded by AIS for each month per year. This is done in order to generate yearly and monthly vessel movements to perform further analyses. After this data is generated, we are able to see monthly or yearly movements from specific vessel types and/or vessel sizes. Using this tool, you're also able to generate descriptive statistics on the number of nautical miles being sailed per month for a given time period, say, from 2015 to 2019. The graphs and tables provide us with an understanding of how much traffic is in the area and by whom, along with important information on seasonality. The tool is also able to compute vessel density grids, which capture the estimated number of transits by vessel type and size, which give us an understanding of where vessel traffic hotspots might be for a given year. Information that is generated from this tool also feeds into some of our accident models that we have been developing, specifically our fire explosion, foundering, and hull machinery failure models. The second tool we are showing is our encounter algorithm, specifically ship-to-ship encounters based on ship domain theory. This tool iterates through historical AIS data and attempts to identify where and when vessel domains had intersected with each other. The ellipses represent the vessel ship domain. The size of the domain is dependent on the vessel size. The larger the vessel, the larger the domain. This algorithm attempts to identify in what we call a striking encounter. This is when one moving vessel's ship domain intersects with a non-moving vessel's ship domain. The algorithm stores all of the potential encounters within a database that can be visualized and analyzed after. The other encounter type that this algorithm attempts to identify is a collision encounter. This is when two moving vessels' ship domains intersect with each other. Similar to the previous vessel movement density and statistics tool, Information from this algorithm will also feed into some of our accident models, specifically our collision and striking models. We look forward to discussing some of the other tools and models at a later date. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much then, everyone. I'll pass it over to Paul.
Hi, Michael, it's Ron here. I'm going to present next. Let me get my screen shared. Just give me a sec, everybody. I'm trying to. Okay, so welcome. My name's Ron Pelot, and I'm a professor at Dalhousie University. I'm also the Associate Scientific Director of MEOPAR, as Jennifer introduced me earlier. And MEOPAR, for those who haven't heard of us, means Marine Environmental Observation, Prediction, and Response Network, and it's a network of centers of excellence. So it's funded by the Tri-Council primarily, and then we have a lot of industry and government partners on various projects. One of the key partners we have is Exact Earth Limited, which, in case not all of you know, most of you would, amongst other things, collects ship movement data, AIS data using satellites, and then that enables them to gather data on places where there's everywhere, including places where there's no land-based receivers within range. And so MEOPAR started in 2012, and around just shortly after that, we made this arrangement with Exact Earth because we knew that we wanted to do quite a bit of research on shipping risks. MEOPAR covers things around ocean changes and climate changes and coastal risks, but it also includes issues related to uses of the ocean, and that includes shipping. So the arrangement with Exact Earth is that we'd have up to 10 licenses for our 5-year cycle, and then we could have a proposal process within MEOPAR for MEOPAR researchers to look at different topics of shipping that related to our network's mandate. So for example, if you want to look at crew safety or on ships or things like that, we wouldn't do that because it's kind of outside the scope of what we're looking at, which is, you know, shipping patterns, risks of shipping, impacts of shipping on the environment. So although today's mandate is to start off a broader discussion on shipping frameworks, shipping approaches, and especially an inventory of what's happening and who's doing it and what tools are out there, in a very general sense, even though we haven't done that within MEOPAR, I guess you could think that some of our projects are about things that happen to ships, like bad weather and presence of ice, and if things happen to ships, certainly search and rescue effective planning models, and things that are impacts caused by ships, where the ships themselves can be the source of the hazard, and similar to the cumulative effects model and other models that have just been mentioned by TC and ClearSeas. So impacts on you know, whale collisions and all the things that come with ships moving through an area, such as air pollution, noise, and possible things like spills, more extreme events, and the response. And then some of the modeling or some of the research we do within MEOPAR using the Exact Earth AIS data is to, it's not about those two things directly. So there's the issue of marine protected areas, and with more of them coming on stream. So, you know, how would they affect shipping traffic, or once they've been decided where they are, how do you have to manage the shipping traffic to go around it or slow down and those kind of things. And other aspects of shipping traffic that are not strictly risk related, like tourism and route planning, disruptions to shipping generally, and vessels of opportunity. So I'm going to give you a list. It's not the most exciting way to do a presentation, but because my aim is to show you the kind of work MEOPAR does, I certainly don't have time to go into the 20 projects that we've done, because we're into our second cycle of MEOPAR. So you can see from the dates there. At the top, 2012, 2017 was our first 5-year cycle, and now we're into our second 5-year cycle, during which we have a second set of licenses from Exact Earth to do more projects. And so I want to show you basically what they are, and later in the breakouts, when we're thinking about, you know, what is it in common, what is the structure and the keywords to inventory all these kind of projects. Here's 20 here, and all the ones TC's doing, all the ones ClearSeas are doing, and then tons that aren't on our 3 presentations. So there's different ways to slice and dice it so that it's easy to use similar terminology and similar practices when we're trying to link where all of these fit into the pantheon of ship problems. So very briefly here, noise in the marine environment makes sense. You would know what that is. And there's another noise related one in the St. Lawrence by Duprat and Clément Chillon. And in the St. Lawrence, they've been working on a kind of a multi-impact model for many years. And this 3MT sim, and with the MEOPAR work, they wanted to include other factors with more noise modeling and ship-whale interaction modeling. You may have heard about Chris Taggart's project, and Kim Davies, one of his main researcher RAs, grad students, who's now a professor at UNB and working a lot on this. So this has a lot of government partners. MEOPAR was one of the big initial supporters. And once you can think about, you know, you want to learn more about where the whales are, so either you can stop the ship or divert the ship or whatever. And also think about where the ship traffic is and the patterns over time versus the whale's spatial distribution. So they do all of that kind of work. There's a Global Watch and other initiatives like the one supported by MEOPAR have looked at fishing patterns around the world, but mostly trying to detect illegal fishing patterns just from the movement of vessels, trying to figure out what kind of fishing vessels they are and what they're doing and where they, and if they're in the wrong area at the wrong time, that would help with some kind of enforcement or regulatory movements. Stephanie Chang at UBC used the AIS data to look at disruptions to marine transportation, but largely around fuel, getting fuel mainly to Vancouver Island and I guess the surrounding islands, and what are the impacts of that and what could be backup plans. And here's something about, you know, some of the air pollution in harbors, including what's coming from ships. So that was trying to incorporate the shipping emissions into more general measures. I did some generic modeling on oil spill risks, thinking where the ships and where is the risk highest based on simple models of groundings or collisions and proximity to shore and things like that. And there was another one on pressurized ice and how that might interfere with ship progression, done by Rocky Taylor at Memorial. We did a preliminary study of ballast water risks in the north, and a lot of work has continued in that domain by TC and other groups. And the last one here, the big data center, is that Stan Matwin is a prof at Dal, and he manages all this AIS data as well as doing research on it. And that's like, how do you dig the most information out of it, not just a specific shipping impact problem, but how do you extract the maximum data out of there in terms of ships behavior, ship trends, ships misbehavior, things like that. So some of these are a bit similar to the first cycle ones, and I only have about a minute left, but we're looking at oil spills on the West Coast, Dilbit and oil spills. Rosalind Kness has another project looking at whale watching vessel movement, both to understand that traffic better and also to think about smaller AIS transmitters that could be used on vessels like that. It might be cheaper and more accessible. Floris Goerlandt, who's presenting next, is working on a project which I'm involved with and others, looking at if there's a major natural disaster such as an earthquake on the West Coast and it disrupts shipping, what are you going to do about it in the emergency response phase? How are you going to get goods around or to Vancouver Island or evacuation and things like that? Jackie Dawson, as already mentioned by ClearSeas, has done several projects on shipping in the north, including one on looking at marine protected areas and the corridors in the north. David Atkinson, who does a lot of weather and ocean modeling, is looking at the northwest coast of BC and thinking about where's the shipping traffic and what do we need to know about the adverse weather on slowing down or stopping the shipping traffic, which does resupply and other things. I did one model of how do you do a cumulative risk assessment when you want to look at how to combine various types of risks from ships, because risks come with all these kind of risks, and you may want to say overall, what is the risk of a kind of a continuous thing like noise and an extreme thing like oil spills? Mathematically, that's very interesting. How would you go about that problem? Brad DeYoung at Memorial, working with others in MEOPAR, is thinking about how to use vessels around the world to gather more ocean data. And that's not a new problem, but MEOPAR has been working quite hard on various aspects of that. And part of that is to look at where is the global ocean traffic and how can you use that for better planning. Jackie Dawson also has set up this group called CastNet to specifically focus on different aspects of northern shipping with researchers from across the country. And we're looking at how to get different funding for projects related specifically to that. We're starting a project soon, I hope, on the safety of ships up north if they get stuck or have an accident. They have to have some equipment and preparations on board according to the Polar Code to be awaiting rescue, and the question is it really sufficient time? So we're going to do modeling around rescue in the north. And again, Stan Matwin continues to study the data and different ways it can be sliced and diced for effective use. So that's pretty much my time. I'm going to stop there, but I hope that gave you a quick smattering of all the projects that are going on. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass it over to Floris now for the last presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. And thank you everybody for joining. I have to say thank you also to the organizers to invite me. I'm really pleased to be here today. So I'm Floris Goerlandt. I'm an assistant professor in Dalhousie University in Halifax, and I'm also kind of the research chair in risk management and resource optimization for marine industries. So my main sort of research is around maritime risk management, mainly related to emergency response modeling at the moment. So let me also share my screen, and then I'm going to share, yes, yes, and then present. I think that's probably how it works. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about maritime risk management, sort of very generally, about like some generic concepts around it to frame the discussions in the breakout groups. And then I'm also going to talk a bit about guidelines and toolboxes. Several of the presenters before me have already highlighted that there's a lot of work being done. That's clear from both authorities and academia and also NGOs. So there's a lot of work being done. And of course, the issue of having an overview of or inventorizing that is basically what I'm going to give some ideas about. So some generic concepts, and then I'll give an introduction, a very high level overview of existing risk guidelines and toolboxes for maritime authorities and industries that aim to provide best practices or that somehow inventorize existing analysis tools or approaches. And I'll focus on pollution preparedness and response and on port risk management just as examples. So I think because of your interest, everybody in risk management, I think you're mostly familiar with the ISO standard. That's the generic international organization for standardization standard for risk management. So of course, there's many different approaches for risk management, but generally speaking, this framework kind of is a good basis to sort of contextualize some issues. I think most of us are, so basically this framework consists of three major components. Most practical is the process. Then also you have the framework and you have principles. So what are these things? Basically, the process is the very concrete steps to assess risk and to take action. So that concerns the steps identification, analysis, evaluation, and risk treatment. So that's the really application analysis of tools and making your assessment about risk acceptability and actions that are needed, trade-offs and costs involved in decisions, of course, as well. So that's, I think, what many of us are familiar with. Also in the previous presentations, you have seen quite a few examples of that. You also have in the standard the framework, which relates to how risk assessment as a process is embedded in the organization. So that links to who is responsible, what kind of reporting procedures are there, who should be included in the analysis, that kind of more organizational or governance, depending on the context, perhaps, but so more organizational issues related to doing risk assessments. And principles, that's a very high level, category here that speaks to underlying values and considerations. So for instance, being integrated, being structured and comprehensive, customized to the needs, inclusive, dynamic, based on best available information, and so on. So that's generic ideas that are used as a basis for both doing the process, so doing the risk assessments essentially, and also how to link the process and execute it in an organizational or societal context. So that's just as a sort of maybe recap or just a sort of framing of the discussion. So now I'll just give some overview of some existing guidelines and toolboxes with the rationale that in other areas or other application domains, very similar challenges have been found to exist to be able to categorize or to get an idea of existing best practices. So our problem that we have in Canada in context of the Ocean Protection Plan and all the activities related to that and all the scientific research also, that's not unique to Canada. There's other organizations and contexts and areas in the world where that has been found. So there's a few examples here, for instance, the EPPR guideline, so that relates to the Emergency Preparedness, Prevention and Response Working Group of the Arctic Council. So they are interested in doing emergency preparedness and response, obviously, related to shipping accidents and environmental risks. And they also have a guideline with best practices for how to do risk assessment, what kind of data is available, and so on, with the intended users being administrations, intergovernmental organizations, so the Arctic Council in this case, also NGOs and consultants. There can be, of course, other stakeholders, indigenous communities, general public. So this is not limited, but those are the main intended users. Another one that I will talk about briefly is the hazard toolkit. That's actually one originating from the Baltic Sea region. I used to work there, so that's actually why I know it. That relates to seaport risk management. That's focused more on industrial related risks of handling goods and shipping operations in ports, with intended users being port authorities, terminal operators, and marine industry related to their port activities. Then you also have the IALA toolbox. IALA is the International Association for Lighthouse Authorities and Aids to Navigation. It's a very long name, and I won't even try the French. But they also have a toolbox where they are having several risk assessment or maybe risk analysis tools and models focusing on navigation risk with the idea to assess the need for aids to navigation in specific waterway or sea areas. And then you have the open risk guideline. That's a guideline that focuses on oil spill preparedness methods and models and analysis approaches for oil spill, with this focus on the Baltic Sea region as well. So focusing on response authorities, Coast Guard, and then similar organizations, and also intergovernmental organizations. In that case, that would be HELCOM, the Baltic Sea Environmental Protection Commission. So if we kind of look at what those guidelines or toolboxes contain in comparison with the ISO standard way of categorizing things, most of the toolboxes that you see are very strongly focused on the process. So they really give insights into existing models, existing tools, existing best practices, perhaps. But there's also some of these, let's say, guidelines also speak to how to do risk management more broadly. For instance, how to organize the responsibilities, when to do risk assessments. So that's more related to the framework of decisions about when to start processes and things like that. So, and very often actually they also refer explicitly to the ISO standard as a basis of discussing and framing the work that they do for their intended users. So looking a little bit how that is organized in the EPPR guideline for Arctic risk assessment, marine risk assessment. So they focus on the risk assessment process. So they have the different steps, identification, analysis, evaluation, treatment, and they have a brief explanation of what the idea is. So guiding users and stakeholders in understanding what that process actually is, and some issues related to what is the purpose. And then they list several tools and resources, best practices. So they well, or let's say maybe more practices. They refer completed reports, then you can kind of value yourself if it's good or not. So if it's best or not, or just a practice. They also have data sets that can be used for risk assessments. So repositories and sources of data, meteorological, oceanographic, ice data, biological data. So inputs that you could use to making risk assessments. They also have web tools, so different online maps, mainly maps for environmental vulnerability and marine activities in the area. And they also link to basically their own work, the Arctic Council working groups, so that people looking at this website, because there's a link at the bottom here, that people can stay updated on the activities that are being done by the relevant working groups. Then the Seaport risk management, that is a little bit differently structured, so that's a bit of a different approach. Here they also, in this hazard toolkit, they describe risk management very broadly, so based on the ISO principles, framework, and process that I highlighted earlier. And then they have more the idea of having a toolkit. So they have more like a toolbox, a set of tools, and they have labeled them. And they have tags. They have a number of tags, and that by tagging different methods with specific identifiers, it's possible to search that. That's also online. So there's also a link there on the bottom of the page, where you then can look at general risk groups, subgroups within specific, for instance, environmental risk. That could be spills, could be dangerous goods, for instance, that are then related to that. And also you can select properties of methods, for instance, if they're qualitative, if they're quantitative, what kind of data they need, how complex they are, so how much training, roughly speaking, you would need to be able to do those kind of analysis, and how much effort it is. So how much organization researchers would be needed to execute analysis like that, because there can be a very wide variety between that. So that's just a brief overview of how other organizations, other people have dealt with the problem of the volume of different analysis methods that have been made. So in order to be able to categorize that. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions, of course. And with this, I hand it over, I believe, to Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you, Floris, and thank you to all the presenters for your talks today. We do have a few questions that have come in through the chat, so I'll turn our attention to those first. So the first one was just about whether the presentation materials could be made available after the fact, and yes, they will be. We're planning on posting the slide decks and the recording of the presentations on the CMSRF website, which is hosted on the Clear Seas website. So that will be made available after the fact. I think our next question was specifically for Michael. So I think the different speakers have their video turned back on. So thank you guys for doing that. So Michael, a question came in for you from Dave Rolston. He wanted to know if the AIS data has been ground truth using radar. He's asked that many smaller vessels don't use AIS or have details on vessel size or register their AIS. So I don't know if you're able to respond to that, Michael.
Sure. I mean, I'll be honest, we do not ground truth our AIS. We put it through a basic sort of processing to make sure that we remove sort of the false signals over land, etc. But we don't sort of ground truth it against radar. And then I think the comment about smaller vessels and vessels without AIS is a good one. And we are exploring other ways to try and take those vessels into account as we look at marine shipping risk. But we're not quite there yet. So that would be what I would say.
Great, thank you, Michael. So the next question came in was for Ron. Someone was wanting to know, again, it was Dave, I believe, if the reports on the projects are available on the MEOPAR website.
Yeah, so I answered that in the chat, so I'll point everybody there to say that we will have a document summary of all the projects in MEOPAR, and coincidentally, we're redoing our website, so that'll probably be out in the winter, and then we can add a brief descriptions to all the projects there. It wouldn't be possible to find them all listed on our website right now, on our old website.
Great, thank you, Ron. So next question came in from Joe Spears. This was specifically directed to Michael and Transport Canada. So Joe says, Canada prepared materials for the Arctic shipping assessment in 2009, led by the Arctic Council. Have you looked at this work led by Professor Aldo Churkop? A major team was put together to address issues we're discussing here today. This provided a risk framework that went to the Arctic Council, Panam, I'm not sure what that's right, but
Oh, sounds
Michael.
good. Great question. I mean, that is something that we have looked at, and we've looked at sort of the guideline, the electronic one that was put online that I think was in Floris's presentation, as sort of some of those things that we need to remember because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. I mean, that's part of why we're here today, to get that inventory in place. So certainly both of those have been considered, and we're looking at them as we move forward.
Great. Thanks again, Michael. And next question is for you as well. So this came in from Christine K. Are the outputs of the vessel movement and density tool presented made available or published on a regular basis? And could they be made available for collaboration with DFO?
Yep, so I think certainly in the future, we'd look to make them available, I think even beyond the federal government, if that's possible. There is some work that we still need to do internally to make sure that we can do that. But certainly the outputs, we are looking at options about how those can be shared online.
Great. So another question came in from Dave Rolston. Have the new radars been installed yet on the central coast of BC? Could be used to ground truth the AIS risk models. So I think that's coming back to his original question to you, Michael.
Yeah, I don't have the answer on that. I can check with some of my colleagues. I'll start with the Canadian Coast Guard to get an answer back. So I don't know if we have a mechanism for getting back to people if they have a question that we can't answer, but certainly we'll look into that one.
Great, thank you, Michael.
And I would just chip in and say that that's probably quite an essential component, I think, in some of our experience in trying to use AIS tracks to do, potential collision analysis. It's important to verify some of that kind of data.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So I think that's it that we have as written in questions. I can open it up to anyone on the call. If you have a question you'd like to ask now, please raise your hand and we'll give you an opportunity to speak your question verbally. Any other questions before we move to the breakout groups? And I'll ask the two tech people who are supporting us, Bridget and Cindy, to do a scan.
There's one question in the chat and somebody has their hand up. C. Van Dyke.
Oh, hi, I'm C. Van Dyke. Hello?
Hello, yep,
Yeah,
we can
go
hear
ahead.
you. Please.
Okay, I'm Catalda Van Dyke. I have a question around the survey that was done about the safety and reliability of shipping traffic. When was that survey done and where? Where were these participants of the survey located? I'm here on the West Coast in Vancouver. So I know there's, would be strong input from the community here around, safety and reliability of shipping traffic. So I just would like some more information about that survey, please.
Was that directed at me, about the survey I mentioned in my presentation?
Yes.
Oh, sure. I'll post the link in the chat for everyone to see. It does include a breakdown by province as well, so you'll be able to see the viewpoints of those on the West Coast, but in every province as well on a whole number of questions, not just the one I showed you. So I'll send the link along right away.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move to the breakout groups? Any other hands up?
I think Joe Spears has a question. He messaged me privately. So Joe, if you have a question.
Yeah, this is directed to Michael Wallace. Many years ago, actually too many years ago, maybe 40 years ago, Transport Canada looked at the issue of Arctic risk assessment. And I was actually with Dalhousie Ocean Studies program with Edgar Gold. We looked at marine insurance because what I'm hearing today is a lot of sort of analytical analysis, but underwriters look at these issues every day. And Transport actually did quite a bit of work. I spent a year in London at Lloyd's looking at these issues. And I think it's relevant to the analysis of risk management, how insurers look at this, because they're ultimately the ones often controlling shipping activities in addition to the maritime administrations. And I'm just wondering, have you looked at that? And that's probably going back into the great literature. This is not, there's no electronic copies of this. There was quite a body of work done, millions of dollars spent. So I wanted to raise that because I think it's an important one.
No, I think it's actually a great point, Joe. I mean, sometimes we hear from industry that the people who put them under the microscope the most are the underwriters of their insurance. So certainly something we can take back and make sure we consider.
I'll send you some of that because some of that exists in the Library of Parliament and it was quite groundbreaking because at the time, underwriters and Duke Snyder I see is in this group. I mean, he's well aware of this. Underwriters often go and look at these things. And one of the problems we have in Canada is we have no foreign, we have no commercial ships engaged in deep sea trade. And a lot of the stuff we're talking about is impacting the Canadian coast. So I think that's a pretty relevant issue to sort of raise at the start of this analysis.
I appreciate that. Anything you can send along, we'll certainly take into consideration. And thanks for digging it up.
Thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. So I know we're a bit behind, so I might cap us there on the questions. If there's any further questions that you haven't had a chance to ask today, we will provide an email address for the Canadian Marine Shipping Risk Forum at the end. You can direct your follow-up questions in an email, and we can, if they're for the specific speakers, we can link you to those speakers to get a response at a later date. But I will stop us there for now. So that concludes our presentations and Q&A period. I did want to thank all the speakers again for your content and the participants for your questions. I think we have some great context for on what our objectives are for here today and what's going on in terms of the different risk work in Canada to help us build out this inventory of resources, which we're going to talk about in our breakout group sections. So in a few minutes, we're going to split into those smaller groups, and we do have some key questions that will help us guide our discussions today as prompts for those breakout groups. So I think Cindy is going to share her screen again with the breakout group questions. So our objective with these smaller group discussions is to tap our audience here today for more ideas of what should be included in this inventory. So we've talked about quite a number of different initiatives so far today, but we really want to get the full suite of things. So Francis did give us some great examples of the kinds of things that we're looking for, and you can, as well as the talks from the other. Floris gave some great examples, but yeah, we're looking for different things that we can include in that common risk framework. So the questions that we have here are, what are the Canadian tools and resources that could be useful for marine shipping risk practitioners to include in an inventory and that common risk framework? So looking at different risk management projects and initiatives that are underway, key practices related to risk management, different types of data and known data sets that are available, ideas about who the different users are that this would be useful for, and any other suggestions that you might have. We're also looking for suggestions on what you might have for how the inventory could look and how it could work. And we're also looking for suggestions at the end of how we can reach out to others who might have input to provide into this initiative. So we'd planned for about 50 minutes for the breakout groups. I think we're running a little bit behind. So we'll bring everyone back to the main room at 20 after the hour. So I know we're all in different time zones. So that'll be 11:20 here in Vancouver, and I'll let you do that adjustment on your own for your different time zones. But yeah, I think that leaves us there. Do any of the speakers have anything that they want to add before we talk about the breakout group logistics? Nope. Okay.
Oh, sounds good.
So we're going to form 5 different breakout groups. I'm not sure what our numbers are at now, but I think we're at about 80, 90 people when we started. I know there'll be a bit of attrition going into the breakout groups. So there should be about 15 people per group. Each group will have one of the speakers or myself helping to moderate the group. And there'll also be a scribe taking notes. And as I said, we'll come back at 20 past the hour to this main room. I think there'll be a notice from the tech support on what the timeline is when we have sort of a 5-minute warning to be coming back. And yeah, when you're in the breakout groups, you're welcome to turn on your audio and video. I think we'll do a quick introduction to the different people that are in your group. And then we can go ahead with the different questions. So just a reminder again that the breakout room discussions will not be recorded. And so any of the content that you share in the chat won't be saved. So if there's things that you're trying to catch, please do share it with the scribes can help copy that and put it into the notes that they're taking, but do help them capture the details that we're wanting to capture in these breakout groups. I think you can leave the breakout group at any time if you need to take off soon. And I think that's about it. Oh, if you need to ask for help, there's I think a help button where the tech host can help with the breakout group. So that's there if we need it. So without further ado, Bridget, I think will now move us all into the breakout groups. I think that takes a little bit of a minute for that transition to happen, but you should be in one in the next minute or so.